I was chilling at a friend couple's house one day. I call them that because both she and he are my friends equally, and they were both getting quite rowdy with their drunkenness. They had begun to argue over the music. He wanted the volume pumped way up, and she wanted it turned down so she could hear the TV. They kept on arguing. When she snatched the phone and messed up the speaker to the point he had to go fix it, he convinced her to give him the phone back, and he plugged it back in and cranked it way up. Now, let me take this moment to go back and explain some things. This couple is fucking nuts, and I don't mean just crazy in a relationship or real wild mood swings or something. No, I mean they are both crazy as shit as individuals, certifiably so actually. Most of the time, they're just really cool people who argue a lot and sometimes try to kill each other. When it's not the latter though, it's actually sometimes pretty funny. So, on this particular day, I'd been over there pretty much all day. They'd been drinking heavily as they usually did, and been arguing all day as they usually did as well. I was sitting in between them in their small camper, just kinda watching them go back and forth, keeping my eye on the clock because it was nearing 4 p.m. This meant if anything crazy was going to happen, it was getting within an hour of that time. Somehow, over the time period of knowing these two, I'd figured out that all of their episodes usually took place after 5 p.m., the worst ones at least. Because of this, I made it a point to not ever stay past 4. They continued to fight, but this time it was really escalating. He started getting really pissed and told her if she ever touched his music again, he was going to shoot her with his gun. She sat there quietly for a moment, and I began to gather my things 30 minutes before the usual time. Lighter? Check. Cigarettes? Check. Umbrella? That's when she got up from the chair and walked right over to his face. You know what? I'm sick of you. I'm going to kill you. I killed my ex-husband, and I'll kill you too. Now, allow me to interject once more. This was a known fact that she did indeed kill her ex-husband. She even went to prison and served her time. This was not something that was hidden. In fact, they were both even friends back when the murder first took place. She had even let him know a few hours before the murder that if she went home and her husband hit her again, she was in fact going to kill him. Well, after she said that, I decided that suddenly I really didn't care that much about grabbing my umbrella anymore. I'd watched them down at least 50 beers that day, and it was starting to get unusually heated in there. It wasn't worth that dollar store general umbrella. Perhaps I'd ask them to send it over the next time I came over. I went ahead and started leaving, telling them I'd catch them some other time. They were insisting that I stay behind, saying we could have a barbecue or something. I really declined though. I made an excuse that I had to go home anyway because I had left some meat out to thaw. On my way out, I passed by a mutual friend who was just coming through the doorway, and I whispered into their ear, "Hey, it's getting pretty crazy in there. You might want to get the hell up out of here." I said it as quietly as possible so neither of them could hear me. Well, when I got up the next morning and got on social media, the very first thing I saw on the broadcast page was she'd been arrested once again for attempted murder. Not even an hour after I'd left, in the presence of our mutual friend and another friend of theirs, she'd grabbed the gun and gone crazy and shot her boyfriend twice with it as well. In the end, they dropped the charges on her due to lack of evidence, and somehow the two of them got back together again. They're even still together to this day. I really don't know how they do it. At the time, I was about 10 years old, so really young. My friends and I were shopping, and our parents had suggested we get some matching cool shoes. There was this really neat modern-style shoe shop nearby as well. We were wandering around the store looking for a cool pair while our parents talked to one another at the entrance. While Alex, Susan, and I were looking at rainbow tennis shoes, a man who we had first assumed was the owner of the shop asked if we needed any help. We simply said no thank you. Even after saying this though, he didn't really bug off. Instead, he followed us around trying to talk to us, asking us our addresses and where we lived. He also asked us how old we were and if we had anyone watching us right now. It seemed a bit odd, but we didn't really think it was that bad, so we answered. Not the personal stuff like the address or anything like that though. We ignored those creepy questions. He soon tried to convince us to go with him into the basement of the shop. "Oh, you like that pair, huh? There are some similar ones that are way cooler down here." We smiled at the man, feeling a bit more reassured now. "Oh, yeah, thanks. Could you grab them for us?" Immediately, he frowned. "Well, I need you to come with so I can measure your shoe size, and get the perfect shoe for each and every one of you." We were unsure at this point. We followed him out to the back and looked down into this deep staircase leading into the basement. It was pitch dark and extremely creepy. It smelled heavily of cigarettes and something else we couldn't quite pin down, and we could hear the faint sounds of people talking down below. We were young and stupid though, and youngsters, I suppose, always see the best in everything. I was the very first to take a step down. I remember I had only taken 2 steps when my parents burst through the door extremely freaked out. They thought we had gone missing. The real owner of the shop had been looking for us as well. When they saw the situation, they seemed very confused. They grabbed all 3 of us by the arm and ran out immediately, and we walked as far away as we could. At the time, I was extremely confused, and I asked my mom what was going on. She told me that man had probably wanted to do something bad to you. I thought he wanted to murder me at the time. Now I look back on that day though, and I'm so grateful that my parents came to save me. Who knows where I would be today, or what I would be like. That was definitely one of the scariest moments of my life. This actually happened to 5 of my coworkers when I was in the US Air Force while stationed at Hahn AB, Germany. Since it's a cautionary tale and it happened 40 years ago this weekend, I believe it's worth retelling. The people's names have been changed, of course. These guys did what airmen stationed at Hahn often did on weekends, drove down to the Mosel River to go drinking. It was one of the first warm weekends of spring, and everyone wanted to get out and have some fun. Well, after much alcohol consumption, they decided to move on to a different location. Everyone was extremely wasted though. The most wasted one, Joe, was driving. Dan, Matt, Mike, and Noel were his passengers. As they headed to their next stop, Noel became increasingly alarmed at Joe's ability to drive the car. They were going way too fast, and Joe was having a hard time keeping the vehicle on the road. They had finally had enough. "Stop this car and let me out right now." "Noel, we aren't even close to the base. You really want to get out here in the middle of nowhere?" "Yes, let me out." They dropped Noel off and continued on without him. Within a few minutes, Joe lost control of the car completely. He drove off the road, flipped through the air, and slammed into a tree. They were traveling at an extremely high rate of speed, and the car was completely destroyed. Dan and Matt were both killed immediately. Mike had some internal injuries, but he walked away from the crash in the end. Joe was more seriously injured, but he did survive. Noel was the smart one. He knew when it was time to leave. We both happened to get assigned to the same base for our next duty location, and we always talked about how fortunate he was to get out of that car when he did. He very well would have lost his life that weekend if he didn't get the sudden sense that he needed to leave. When I was a teen, my 2 friends who were sisters would always run away from home. They usually came over to my house on weekends. Then they returned home a couple of days later. One night I drank for the first time, and the next day I felt extremely hungover. I had a real bad headache. I was actually excited to know that this was what the first hangover feels like, so I just relaxed at home. One of my friends, though, called me up on the house phone, asking me to come kick it with them. She had found a new hangout spot she'd run away to, and it was close by to my apartments. She wanted me to come check it out with her. At first, I was really hesitant because I really didn't feel well, but she begged and begged, so eventually I did give in. It was kind of close by to where I lived, but still somewhat far away. I got ready real quick and started walking, feeling a bit shitty. Anyway, I go to my friend's Runaway Home. She answered the door and showed me around this random house. I was surprised she'd found an actual place to stay. I mean, you have your own room here? She said yeah, and that she just gave the owner of the house stuff like food and he let her stay there. I nodded my head, thinking that made sense. Next, she told me we were going to hang out in this particular room, and I was surprised. We? What do you mean? She said her boyfriend was there as well. She wanted me to meet him. She loved him so much and he was so cute and all that stuff. So I go into this room, right? And I meet her boyfriend. He's years older than us, maybe like 3 or 4 years. Also in the room, there's a much older man. Shaved head, muscle shirt. He looked sunburnt and reddening on his skin. He had faded prison-looking tattoos that made him look much older, and he looked like he'd been through some serious shit. He was turned around ironing some clothes or something. Immediately, I was very hesitant. I walked in warily and shook my friend's boyfriend's hand. Then she told me to sit down. They started small talk as I sat down on the bed next to them. I felt really weird though about this whole situation. Immediately, they started asking me all kinds of questions. Where do you live? What do you do? Do you have a lot of friends? Does anybody check on you? I made it sound as vague as possible, hoping my friend would not give them any real information. It turned out she was a fucking idiot though. All of a sudden, I felt like she had set me up. Perhaps like the old man had told her to call her friend over or something. I honestly thought when I was heading over here that it was just going to be me and her, that she really wanted to see me because I was her friend. So of course, I felt really caught off guard. I sat down on the bed thinking of a way to get out of there. I came up with a thought to mention that I had a real bad headache from going out the night before. They asked why, and I said I drank more than usual and felt really hungover. The older man became very excited. Oh man, have a beer then. It's a cure for hangovers, you know. You gotta drink, that's the only way. He handed me this open beer he had set to the side. Little known fact, I fucking hate beer. I won't drink it ever. But that's another story. I pretended to drink. Oh yeah, that's the stuff. I could feel the beer pressing against my lips, but I didn't take a single sip. The man immediately came over once he thought I'd finished. Here, I'll grab you another one. He handed me an even bigger can. That'll sure cure your hangover. At this point, my idiot friend grabbed a meth pipe and started lighting it right in front of me. All I could see were huge, thick clouds. I was thinking, what the fuck? She passed it over to her boyfriend, who smoked out of it and then tried to pass it on to me. No thanks, I'm good. The beer is really good though, thanks so much. He passed it over to the old man. I was really starting to get concerned now. He hit the bowl and exhaled. I was sitting there thinking, what the fuck had I just gotten myself into? I better not be getting high off this shit just by being here. My friend laughed, telling them she didn't smoke meth. Then, while everyone was talking, the old man apparently thought we were hitting it off well. He grabbed me close and decided to lay his head on my lap. I was wearing shorts, so I could feel his disgusting, bald, wrinkly head touching my skin. I wanted to throw it like a hot potato. There we all are on this bed, and I'm feeling worse and worse about this situation. I was saying to myself in my head, I need to get the fuck out of here now. I pretended to drink the rest of the beer and said I had to throw the can out. I started to walk out, saying to my friend I really wasn't feeling well. I was going to head out now. I could immediately see the disappointment in the two men's faces. Her boyfriend looked over at the man, and he stood up from the bed and went to move like he was going to block me from leaving. They kept insisting I stay and have another beer. My friend was even begging me to stay as well. I had already started to leave though. I knew the front door was only a few feet away, and I was going to get there. As the man came closer to me, I began to sprint. As soon as I shut that door behind me, I took off running even faster. I hit those corners and slid. I knew I had to get away from there. I didn't stop running until I got to the front of my apartments. That's when I felt my head pounding. I felt so gross coming out of that room. I went straight home and slept the day away. More days passed by, and I hadn't really been back over there. I would make excuses whenever my friend invited me back. I just couldn't shake the uneasy, gross feeling, and I didn't want to be around drugs or those dudes at all. One day, I finally met with my friend's sister. We were hanging out and had one of those long, late-night conversations when she told me her sister was still at that house, now getting high. I was surprised. I thought she would have gotten fed up with running away and went back home like usual by now. She told me she had been over there to visit her sister and spent the night, and then she asked me to keep a secret. She told me during the night she slept over, an old man had come into the room and forced himself on her. I asked her if she knew who it was, and she said yes. It was that older guy with the bald head. I'm really glad I didn't decide to stay any longer. When I lived in New Orleans, a friend and I were invited by another friend to have lunch and hang out at yet another friend's house. It was a pool party, or so we understood, over in the Lower Magazine District. It seemed like a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon, and an even better way to meet some new people. We were there in about 10 minutes. I was seated in the living room when I idly picked up the lid of this beautiful ornate bowl, about the size of a large salad bowl, I guess. It was really pretty, so I wanted to take a closer look at the gorgeous glaze. Holding the lid though, I looked inside and saw the bowl was heaped full of white amethyst crystals of varying sizes, from aquarium gravel to as thick as my index finger. It took me all of about 10 seconds to realize what I was looking at was a pile of crystal meth in a startling quantity. As in a bang my ass in prison immediately quantity. As I was still holding this lid in front of me, staring transfixed by the realization of just how much meth I was looking at, another of the apparent hosts of the pool party walked in. He was a strikingly handsome man, and an athletic guy as well, maybe in his mid-20s or so. He was in swim trunks but had not yet been in the pool, as they were completely dry. He stopped in place and looked at me quizzically, his face somewhere between stony and surprised to see me there. His eyes had that certain flat lack of view into his inner state, a hardness that I instinctively associate with ruthlessness and a willingness to hurt others. I noticed that he was carrying a sawed-off shotgun and also a rag as well. I assume he was meaning to clean it, as the barrel was at an angle, not closed and ready for use. What my brain flagged for my sole attention in the moment, though, was that he had a sawed-off shotgun. He looked over and saw me holding the lid of the bowl. I could see him glance back to his gun, then glance back at me. I immediately became terrified. Excuse me," I said amid an arid silence. I set the lid gently back down on the bowl. I thought it was potpourri." He paused for a moment, silence growing electric in my mind. He smiled an extremely taut, thinly veiled smile and looked me up and down. We stood there for what felt like hours, but was really only a few moments. "No worries." His English had an accent. He strolled past me towards the back of the house. "Dude, I think we should leave right now." I hushed to my friend seated across from me. He was already there. We didn't stop to say goodbye. I just wanted to not be there for even another minute. That shotgun guy had prompted an animal fear in me that had thoroughly flushed my guts with hot, tremble-inducing adrenaline. We later learned a couple weeks later that someone had torched the car belonging to the hosts. It was reduced to a blackened shell, and there was collateral damage to nearby cars as well. Apparently, that shotgun guy I had seen was part of the Russian mafia. My sense was that I had come uncomfortably close to far more of the underworld than I would ever know how to find my way into. I was probably immediately recognized as either being a clueless interloper, or worse, possibly taken for an undercover officer with zero skills of being undercover. Needless to say, I laid low for a while after. The potpourri mafia is not for me. I was about 11 when my friend Louie and I decided to attempt an adventurous hike in the woods near his house. It was winter at this time and had been cold for quite a while. Louie and I shared this love for adventure, and today promised to add a brand new chapter to our already impressive book of feats. A couple of times we had made some small rafts from driftwood and rope, and tried to cross by a shallow creek. On other occasions, we climbed in high trees or hiked through meadows full of dangerous cows. The adventure was everywhere. Today was a different day though. We would cross a lake on the icy sheet by which it was covered. The view was absolutely amazing, and the first 10 minutes or so walking out onto that lake went ever so smooth. But then it happened. We heard a sudden deep rumbling coming from underneath. The ice was cracking, and this was the real thing. At an enormous pace, cracks began appearing everywhere around us. In a matter of moments, a large crack appeared right between our legs from behind us, racing to the edge of the water in no time, as if a lightning bolt had just been drawn in the ice. This was obviously bad. Two things crossed my mind in this moment. One of my cousins had almost died after he'd fallen through the ice before only a couple of years back. And two, Louie didn't know how to swim. I was absolutely sure he would panic if he ended up in the icy water. I had once seen him having a panic attack just in the deeper part of a pool and had to drag him out in the end. He was already in a panic now. I stood there for a moment frozen, trying to figure out what to do. I shouted that we both had to lie down on our bellies carefully and make no sudden moves. We spread our arms and legs out like Leonardo's Vitruvian Man. He was crying but followed my suggestion nonetheless. We both laid down on that cracked ice. What happened next was not the prettiest or most graceful of sights. Instead of elegantly gliding on the ice as professional ice figure skaters, we crawled slowly like a snake with an acute indigestion problem. It took us an hour to reach the other side, and when we finally laid down on the white grass by the lake, Louie was crying. At this point, I looked back at the deep cracks in the lake and the ice that looked like it was just about to shatter. Then I looked back up at the skies. I was already thinking about what we were going to do in our next chapter of our book of feats, but we decided to take a break for a while after. In my early 20s, I was driving home to New Hampshire from my Christmas holiday with my family in upstate New York. I had a VW Beetle filled to the gills with my gifts, and my young Keyshound mix in the back seat. He'd often lick people to death, but that was about all he could do. As I topped a hill in Enfield, New Hampshire, a few feet down there happened to be a speed trap, and needless to say, I got snagged. Couldn't have been doing much over the 30 miles per hour, since a loaded Beetle had trouble even making it over the hill. I was enough above though as I crested that the officer pulled me over. I took the ticket and re-entered the empty road to resume my journey, when I could suddenly feel my car start acting funny. I pulled over less than a mile down the road, only to find it now had a flat tire. Well, where was that damn officer when you needed him now? Not a soul in sight. It was very late at this point, and even if it was early, it would get dark around 3:30 p.m. in the winter around here, so it might as well have been midnight. I contemplated how I was going to unload my car on the side of an extremely snowy road, with banks piled high and little shoulder. For those of you who know your Beetles, the tools are stored under the back seat. Refresh your memory above if you need to. I had quite a job ahead of me. The next thing I knew though, I saw a car coming down the road. The guy pulled off to offer me assistance. He seemed a bit tipsy, and when I told him of my dilemma, rather than jumping in to offer his aid, he said he would go get someone else to help me out. I was thinking to myself, tow service, you know? He was not though. In the meantime, another car passed by and pulled off in front of me. This was the 70s, and I had been taught that men with long hair could be extremely iffy. Luckily, this guy was a nice guy though. He came over and immediately assessed the situation and began emptying my car. His wife was still in theirs. I told him how extremely grateful I was he'd come along. Right about then though, the first guy pulled in with another drunk in tow. My long-haired helper advised me to stick behind him like glue and told me he would not let anything happen to me. The first guy began to try to pull me into his car to warm me up. He tried to pin me up against it and forcibly kiss me. I held my own though, and with my backup there to help me, I let this idiot know in no uncertain terms I was not going anywhere with he or his buddy. They stared the other man down and seemed like they were getting ready to fight. Eventually though, they decided to give up and left. I was still really shaken though. I knew that if this nice long-haired gentleman had not showed up, I would have been raped or possibly even worse that evening. When the man was done and the car was reloaded, he said he would follow me to make sure those drunks didn't follow me as well, until he had to make his turn off toward Plymouth. The rest of my ride was fairly uneventful. I guess they saw his car following me and decided not to pursue. To this day, I still get chills whenever I think back to that event. I had a newfound appreciation for men with long hair, and I was much less judgmental about looks after that. I made the trip up to Plymouth to thank him again a few days later. I don't really remember his name anymore, but I do know that he owned, I believe, a bike shop down there. If you see this recounting, dear guardian angel, know that I've never forgotten what you did for me that day many years ago. At the time, I was 16 and female, and I was attending my first college quarter. Everything was going pretty smoothly, and I was making lots of friends actually. That is, until about halfway through the semester. One of my classmates, 26 and male, came up to me and asked to exchange numbers and potentially go out on a date. I tried to make myself very clear that I did not want to go out with him, simply because he was a lot older than me and I was not really interested. I let him down very gently, but he insisted that he give me his number at the very least. I continued to tell him no when he suddenly grabbed my phone out of my hand and made himself a contact. This startled me, but it only got worse from there. The next day in class, we had our regular 10-minute break, and I was chatting with my friends. He came up to me mid-conversation asking me to go walk with him. I firmly told him, no, I'm in the middle of talking to people. He basically gave me the finger and acted like I was the worst person in the entire world. He stormed down the hallway, kicking open the doors. I went back into the classroom to at least be by my professor if anything more happened that day. My friend texted me immediately, asking what I'd said to this guy. He was apparently outside kicking around trash cans and screaming at everyone who walked by him. At this point, I was scared to even leave the classroom. I didn't know what this crazy guy was going to do. I had a previous stalker at the beginning of the semester and had been in contact with the school about that. I expressed how my classmate was making me uncomfortable at my weekly counseling sessions. The school was now aware. Because of this, he ended up leaving me alone for about a week or two. Then one day though, there was a note on my desk asking if I loved him, if I wanted to marry him, if I wanted to have kids with him. He was not in the classroom when I saw it, so I slipped it into my backpack and ignored him for the rest of the lecture. I handed the note to my counselor as well, so she could see he was a real issue. I believe she contacted my professor to make sure I was safe in class. After the note, we only had about a week left, so jumping now to the very last day. It was an independent study day, and we were all on our own. He came into class and somehow managed to get himself kicked out, so he ended up leaving. I felt extremely relieved, because I knew that was the last time I would ever see him. At this point, I knew I needed to get my stuff done quickly and make a mad dash to my car. I was about one lecture from finishing when he walked through the door and sat down at his desk. At this point, I knew I needed to log off my computer and just finish this later. I gathered up all my things and thanked the professor. I was speed walking to my car when I had the gut feeling someone was staring at me. I turned around quickly to make sure it was not him. Unfortunately, it was, and he was full-on sprinting towards me. My first reaction was to panic and call my mom for help. Just as our call connected, he grabbed my arm and pulled me to a stop. At this point, I was telling him to leave me alone as loud as I could and that I was only 16. He leaned in and whispered to me word for word, "Age doesn't matter, you know. I know we're in love." I broke free and ran to my car as fast as I could to get away. He stayed right on my ass though. Thankfully, the only door unlocked on my car was the driver's side door because he ran to the passenger side and tried to force his way in. From that day on, I watch my surroundings extremely intently and always have to make sure nobody is watching or following me.